A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Turning our attention today to a topic we don't often get a chance to talk about, and that is what happens with our children and their own anxieties about what's going on in the world by way of conflict and wars. You might have sat in front of your television screen while the news has been on and you've seen soldiers shooting one another and bombs going off. Well, our guest today, back with us to talk about children and the way they process the issues around war. And our guest today, Hilary Robinson, award-winning author. She's written something like 70 children's books, and some of those have been about how children process war and conflict. Hilary, back on the line with us from London. Hello, Hilary. Welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Pleased to be with you.
Hilary, you were just not that long ago, you were confronted by the idea that while we talk about Remembrance Day, and we have our own days in Australia, Anzac Day, there's all sorts of days when we commemorate war through the year, but very little was around for children. Take us back to your motivations for writing about children and war.
Well, back in 2012, 2 years before the First World War commemorations were due to begin over a 4-year period, it became apparent that nothing was being done for children age 7 and under. And I was aware that actually some of these young children were in danger really of missing out on this significant period in history. And having grown up in a war zone myself during the Civil War in Nigeria, I was aware of quite a lot. I was aware of people helping. I saw the best and worst of humanity. My father doubled as a humanitarian worker as well as a university lecturer. And my great uncles, 2 of them, both of whom died in the First World War, one at the Somme, actually. And these family stories sort of were around us all the time. And I spoke to Martin Impey, who's a military historian and illustrator, and said to him, I think we should do something here. So I wrote the story called Where the Poppies Now Grow, and he illustrated it. And it immediately sold out. And this was in the May before Remembrance, which is commemorated here in the November. So there was an enormous reprint. And then I was aware also of the Christmas truce, which is where soldiers on both sides put down their guns on Christmas Eve and shook hands. I don't know whether that was inspired by the Pope, actually, who said, may the guns fall silent, at least upon the night the angels sang. And I think that message may have got through. And so we did the Christmas truce. And then 2 more followed. Flow of the Somme, about animals and the role of dogs, particularly in war, and Peace Lily, about the role of women in war. And in all cases, the story covers, we were, again, very mindful of how children can be disturbed by war and conflict. But also we wanted to celebrate humanity, kindness, the fact that there were people helping amidst all of this, and that compassion will win out. And so there is a religious element through it as well. And Martin Impey did a brilliant job in creating the artwork to go with that. And again, as with all of my books, it's tried and tested to make sure that our books help children rather than harm children, because that is so important as a writer and illustrator to get that right.
It sounds to me like having a Hilary Robinson book on your bookshelf for those times when you commemorate war and you recognise that your children are hearing something at school or they're seeing something on the television. Being able to pull that off at the bookshelf just in that moment, to be able to help them process the things that are going on. As you say, children are often disturbed by the images of conflict, and even when it's historic footage, those things can be disturbing because children don't necessarily have context. So tell us about how your story, Where the Poppies Now Grow, how does the narrative unfold there that teaches children how to process these things?
Well, that's a very good point that you made there about them not having the context of old film footage as well. So thank you for making that point. Where the Poppies Now Grow is a highly illustrated book about two friends, Bennett and Ray, and it's set at the turn of the century. And they're playing at being soldiers, and one of them is you can tell it's written in rhyme. It's written in verse, in what we call cumulative verse. So it builds and builds and builds, a little bit like This Is the House That Jack Built. So you introduce a new line and you repeat the one from before. So it builds and builds and builds, and then it goes full circle right back to the beginning. And so I had to rely on Martin Impey, the illustrator, to depict the characters, so that one was playful and one was actually very sensible. That comes out in the artwork. And then the boys grow up and they volunteer and they become soldiers and they go off to war. And Martin, being the expert that he is, was very good with the detail in the story. But again, it's nothing too alarming. And he refers to a lot of historical bits and pieces, landscapes, places. In Flow of the Somme, for example, we've got a map of the Somme at the beginning and then a map of the Somme at the end, and how some of the soldiers called one area Sausage Valley and the other one Mash Valley, sausage and mash, just to sort of help things become a little bit more friendly and familiar. So we're sort of teaching history as well through it. And at the end, the boys are old. I mean, one does become injured, one is saved by the other. And at the end, they're old men with their poppies back in their home village where they began. So it's this whole cyclical methodology of showing that things are the nature will strengthen and heal. And that was central to the story. And by addressing war in that way, I think that children felt, or people that were sharing stories about war felt, that they could trust us. And I think that that's a very important thing. We need to be trusted. We cannot make any mistakes. We cannot do anything that is going to be disturbing. And through all of that, and especially with the Christmas truce, you saw that friendship was the more powerful force in the pursuit of peace. And that's a lasting message which we hope children will take home and hold forever.
Do you think that when children are confronted with the images of war, or indeed if they've got a relative who's fighting in a war, it can feel like this is never ending? So the importance of being able to focus on what happens at the end, or this is not personal, it's nation against nation. When you talk about the Christmas truce, the idea that the soldiers may not hate each other, but they're shooting their bullets at one another and they're aiming to kill. But the idea that that's not continuous, but that there is hope of one day having a resolution and that war will be over, peacetime returns. How important is that for kids, do you think?
Well, I think what's very interesting about the Christmas truce is the message that comes out of it, that the governments and the authorities and the military seniors will be encouraging this, but actually it's not what people want. These were ordinary men and young men that went off to war who saw the futility of it. And the message in the story is that friendship will always be the more powerful force in the pursuit of peace. And there is also the message that look for the people that are helping, which was what I was encouraged to do when I was brought up in a war zone. I saw more good work being done, and I saw that would lead towards peace. Fighting didn't. And so through the stories, we hope that message gets across. And so even today, if families have got family members that are involved in war, we will always know that common humanity will win out. It just needs the channel to let that happen. And that comes down to the people. So it's about forces for good succeeding over forces of evil. And I feel that is what we were doing in the series of books. There was another one as well called A Song for Will and the Lost Gardeners of Heligan, which is based on a true story, and it's for older children. And again, that's about nature and about humanity and about compassion and friendship, these powerful forces about faith and having faith in those around us, in our relationships with other people, to pursue the common good.
Hilary, you mentioned the religious dynamic, that dimension there, that God is in the mix. If you didn't have God in the mix, there would be hopelessness. Does the religious dynamic bring in hope when you're talking war?
Well, very much so, and especially during the First World War, where faith was at the heart of a lot of the families left at home and the soldiers who put a lot of trust in God in the hope for a better future. And that comes through in the stories as well. And when I go into schools, I often tell children about the fact that they were so badly equipped at that time. One soldier's life was saved by a small Bible, a small prayer book that was in his pocket on his suit, and a bullet went into the prayer book and saved his life. And they always love that story. So it's interesting that the soldiers were taking their prayer books and small Bibles out with them. You know, in the same way as we talk about mindfulness and prayer and the power of connecting, having faith of that nature certainly can bring strength for families, for children, for those involved in war. And it's no better illustrated than during the First World War, where that was such a massive force for good.
Well, it's nice around this time to know that there are some wonderful resources that you can have on your bookshelf as a parent. And award-winning author Hilary Robinson, and we're talking today about one of her best-known books. She's written 70 of them, and there's a series of 5 that have to do with war. The best-known one is Where the Poppies Now Grow. You'll be able to connect with Hilary at her website, hilary.robinson.co.uk. And of course, you can find the book at all of those great online booksellers, Where the Poppies Now Grow, and some dimensions to that help children understand how to deal with conflict, how to deal with war. And Hilary is renowned for being able to use her children's books to be able to relay wonderful truth and wonderful ways of being able to help children process the issues that they're going through in their life. Hilary, thank you so much for taking some time to share your thoughts once again with us today on 2020.
It's my pleasure, Neil, and thank you so much for having me on the programme. Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.